On a quiet October evening in Willow Bay, a lakeside town of 7,400 residents, known more for its fall festivals than for crime, 17-year-old Emily Harper vanished during her short walk home from the public library, in a place where people rarely locked their doors and everyone recognized everyone else's kids. Emily's disappearance was a fracture point, a moment the entire town remembers as the night Willow Bay changed forever. What begins as a simple missing person report slowly unravels into a case filled with gaps, contradictions, and a timeline that simply refuses to make sense. For decades, it remains the town's most painful mystery. One whisper about it grocery stores, church steps, barbershops, and school hallways. Now, nearly 20 years later, the case is reopened, revealing a truth no one was prepared to confront. October 17, 2006, a Tuesday, a warm, unusually bright evening for mid-fall. Emily left the Willow Bay Library at 6:42 p.m., captured on one of the building's two aging security cameras. She waves the librarian, adjusts her backpack strap, and steps into the amber streetlight glow. Her house is only an 8-minute walk away. She never makes it. Police initially assumed she ran away. A teenager, stressed, midterms coming up, seeking space. This is checked off as the simplest explanation. But anyone who knew Emily, soft-spoken, academically driven, close to her mom, dismisses that theory immediately. By day 3, the town knows something is wrong. And by day 5, the state police take over. A search radius is established, 1 mile around the library. Hundreds of volunteers join in. Flyers cover telephone poles, stop signs, and storefront windows. Kayakers search the edges of Willow Bay Lake. Dogs track a scent that abruptly stops near Maple Ridge Road, a stretch with minimal lighting and no private security cameras. It's the kind of place where someone could stop a car and no one would notice, except someone did notice. A retired school bus driver later reports seeing a dark green SUV idling near that same stretch around the time Emily vanished. But the make, model, and plate are never clearly identified. And in an age before doorbell cameras and dash cams became common, investigators hit their first dead end. Nobody, no suspect, no break in the case. Just a girl who vanished between two streetlights. By spring 2007, the leads dried up, witness calls taper off. Media attention shifts elsewhere. And despite the Harper family's relentless campaigning, Willow Bay slowly drifts back into normalcy, but never fully. Emily's room remains exactly as she left it. Her mother, Karen Harper, keeps the porch light on every night for years. Locals still walk their children home in pairs. One detail haunts investigators. Emily's cell phone was recovered 2 blocks from the library. Screen cracked, battery missing. The battery removal suggests intention, a deliberate attempt to prevent GPS tracking. But beyond that, the device offers no additional clues. By 2009, the case entered cold status. Boxes of files are shelved. Evidence is sealed. And a generation of Willow Bay kids grows up hearing the story as a cautionary tale rather than an active investigation. In 2024, a newly formed cold case review unit was established at the state level. Among the dozens of dormant cases chosen for reevaluation is Emily Harper's. Detective McCall, known for her meticulous, soft-spoken interviewing style, is assigned the file. What intrigues her most isn't what's in the original report. It's what's missing. There are 3 major inconsistencies she flags immediately. Emily's library books were never logged. She reportedly checked out 2 textbooks that night, but the library system shows no record. Were they taken? Deleted? Never scanned? No attempt was made to identify the green SUV through DMV records, even though similar vehicles in a small town are limited. One witness statement appears incomplete. A note at the bottom simply reads, "Follow-up needed. Witness hesitant. Possible connection to volunteer group." But no follow-up ever occurred. McCall begins with old witnesses, starting with a retired bus driver. Age has softened his memory, but one detail resurfaces. It wasn't a regular SUV. The back window had a sticker, a white sticker. Could have been a school, a team, something. It's vague, but it's new. And in cold cases, Even a small detail can crack open a door. While revisiting archived evidence, McCall uncovers an overlooked piece. Fibers found on Emily's jacket. Log is inconclusive in 2006 due to limited technology. With advancements in microtrace analysis, the fibers are now determined to come from a carpeted backseat of an early 2000s Ford Expedition, a large, now older SUV model. Only 4 such vehicles were registered in Willow Bay in 2006. Detectives contact all 4 owners. 3 checks out easily. The 4th does not. It belonged to Gregory Mallon, a former volunteer searcher and local handyman who moved out of state 4 months after Emily vanished, a man who lived just 3 streets from the Harper family. But when investigators attempt to contact him, they discover he died in 2018 in a single vehicle crash. Still, his name resurfaces in 2 witness recollections, both mentioning how unusually dedicated he was during the original search efforts. Overly dedicated, the type of volunteer investigators now recognized as a potential search insert, someone who joins community searches to blend in, monitor progress, and manipulate information flow. It's not proof, but it's enough to escalate the investigation. With Mallon deceased and the original SUV untraceable, detectives turn to interviews with people who knew him. A former co-worker reveals that Mallon abruptly replaced the interior carpeting of his Expedition in late 2006, weeks after Emily's disappearance. When asked why, he told different people different stories. Spilled paint, mold, a dog accident. None of it matches records. Investigators attempt to track down the removed carpet through the disposal company, but nearly 20 years have passed. No logs remain. Every answer leads to another dead end, just like the original case. And yet detectives maintain hope, because Emily's case represents something larger, a chance to identify systemic oversights and correct decades-old investigative gaps. The Cold Case Unit now prepares a comprehensive forensic re-examination of every item collected in 2006. DNA touch testing, enhanced fiber analysis, digital reconstruction of the walk route, tools that didn't exist at the time of Emily's disappearance. Detectives believe they are closer than ever to understanding what happened that night. But until they find the missing piece, one question holds everything in place. Did Gregory Mallon take Emily Harper? Or is the real perpetrator still living quietly somewhere in Willow Bay? When the Cold Case Review Unit begins its modern forensic reassessment of the Emily Harper disappearance, they expect slow progress. Maybe a new lead, a reinterpreted detail, a clearer time window. What they do not expect is a piece of evidence buried so deep in the archives that it had never been processed at all. The discovery happens by accident. While cataloging old evidence envelopes, a technician notices one is missing a barcode, an outdated packaging style used briefly in early 2006. Inside is a small seal vial containing a single hair fragment, collected from Emily's backpack strapped the night it was found during the original search. It had never undergone forensic testing. It had never been logged in the chain of custody. It had simply been overlooked. And now, 18 years later, technology can analyze what 2006 could not. Initial microscopic review confirms the hair did not belong to Emily. It also wasn't from her immediate family or the librarian she interacted with that evening. Those DNA profiles were already on file. The hair fragment contains a partial DNA profile, degraded but viable enough for touch DNA enhancement. Because the profile is incomplete, it can't be matched to any specific individual, but it can be run through genealogical reference databases, similar to the methods that have solved dozens of cold cases nationwide. The results narrow the hair down to one extended family line in the region, remarkably small, comprising only 11 males within the correct age range during 2006. One of those males is Gregory Mallon. But investigators cannot rely on coincidence or proximity. They expand their lens, looking beyond the obvious suspect. And this is where something unexpected happens. While comparing the DNA family line to community records, investigators notice a surname overlap with someone who played a minor but documented role in the original search effort. Thomas Reddington, age 21 in 2006, listed as a volunteer who joined the search on day 2. He lived 2 hours away, attending a trade program, and only joined because he knew people in town. There is no evidence he knew Emily. No one remembered him well. He appeared, searched, and left. But genealogical records place him within the same extended family tree as the partial DNA sample. Detectives track his last known address. They discover he moved out of state in 2013. He is still alive, and when contacted, he agrees to speak. Detective McCall meets with Reddington at a public cafe in Ohio. He is polite, cooperative, and appears genuinely surprised that his name surfaced. He gives permission for a voluntary DNA swab. If his sample matches the degraded hair, investigators may have found their first direct physical link. But McCall notices something else during the interview. When she asks where he was on the night Emily disappeared, Reddington hesitates, not defensively, but as if searching through faded memories. I think I was at my dorm. He says, finally, I didn't know her. I barely even remember Case. The answer is plausible, but something feels off. Not guilt, more like rehearsed uncertainty. When Reddington leaves the cafe, McCall writes a single note in her field book. If not him, then someone close to him. 3 weeks later, the lab notified the cold case unit. The DNA from Reddington does not match the sample found on Emily's backpack. This eliminates him as the source of the hair, but not as a person of interest, because genealogical DNA does not identify individuals. It identifies bloodlines, and the family tree tied to the DNA sample stretches wider than investigators originally thought, into cousins, half-siblings, and relatives linked through marriages and estrangements. Now, detectives must determine, was the DNA from innocent transfer, or was it from someone who encountered Emily in the final moments of her life? The cold case unit hires a digital forensics contractor to enhance the library's 2006 security footage. The old recordings, low resolution, dark, and grainy, are stabilized using modern AI reconstruction. It does not reveal a suspect, but it does reveal something investigators never caught before. At 6:41 p.m., 1 minute before Emily exits the library, a shadowed figure passes by the camera's far right field, moving toward the building's side entrance. The face is indiscernible, the clothing plain, but the height and build appear male, mid to late 20s. This entrance was rarely used. It was unmonitored. It led behind the library, toward the route Emily took. For McCall, this confirms one thing. Someone else was there that night. Someone never documented. Someone who may connect to that DNA line. But who? As the review deepens, investigators make a surprising realization. 3 men connected to the same family tree lived in or near Willow Bay in 2006. One has since died. One moved away. One still lives less than 30 miles from the town. All were within the right age range at the time of the disappearance. All had access to a vehicle similar to the unidentified SUV. All had overlapping ties across the community, work, church, or volunteer groups. One of them may be the person behind the shadow on the library footage. One of them may have crossed paths with Emily Harper that night. And for the first time in years, detectives believe they are closing in not on a myth, not on a rumor, but on a real person. Someone whose identity has been hidden in plain sight. Someone who may have been part of the original search for the girl he helped disappear. The new DNA analysis didn't give Detective McCall a full profile, but for the first time in 24 years, it gave her something no one had ever had in the Emily Harper case. A direction. The touch DNA lifted from the inside of Emily's notebook cover contained a partial male profile, too incomplete for Cody's, too degraded for a straight match, but statistically linked to a tight cluster of families who live within 3 blocks of Emily's walking route in 2001. Not a match. A map. McCall went back to the case files. The early witness interviews were messy, rushed, and in some cases barely readable. But one name, buried in the margins of 2 different reports, came up more than once. Evan Rourke. Back then, Rourke was a 29-year-old transit maintenance worker. He'd told investigators he didn't see anything that day. He was off shift and home early. Detectives at the time believed him and moved on. But the modern cross-referencing software McCall used told a different story. Rourke wasn't off shift. His time card showed he clocked out at 4:58 p.m. Emily Harper disappeared between 5:05 and 5:20 p.m. And his work site? A utility tunnel entrance less than 40 yards from where Emily's abandoned backpack was found. 24 years later, that detail hit McCall like a cold weight in her chest. She requested updated background notes on Rourke. Nothing about him screamed danger. No arrests, no complaints. Moved upstate in 2004, remarried, quiet life. Nothing unusual until McCall checked the timeline again. He moved out of the Bronx 1 week after the Harper case was declared inactive. She dug deeper, with the partial DNA map in hand. Forensic genealogists identified 3 possible family clusters tied to the profile. Only one had a member working near the old tunnel in 2001, the Rourkes. McCall drove to his new address 3 hours north. As she pulled into the quiet suburban street, her phone rang. It was a forensic lab. Detective McCall, the text said, "We've completed the analysis on the second item you submitted." Her pulse tightened. They had only retested 2 items, Emily's notebook and the zipper pulled from Emily's backpack. "What did you find?" McCall asked. The tech hesitated. "Detective, the new DNA we recovered from the zipper pull doesn't match Rourke or anyone in the genealogical group." McCall gripped the steering wheel. "So who does it match?" Another pause. "It matches someone connected to your original investigative team. Someone who handled evidence back in 2001. McCall felt her breath catch. Cold, sharp. "Who?" "You're not going to like this," the text said quietly. "It's a familial match to a retired NYPD officer who worked the Harper case." McCall stared at Rourke's house, suddenly uncertain whether she was looking at a suspect or a scapegoat. Detective McCall stayed in her car for nearly a full minute after the call ended, staring at the quiet, neatly kept house where Evan Rourke lived. For days, she'd been certain she was closing in on him. The DNA map had pointed toward the Rourke family, and the timeline around Emily's disappearance fit almost too well. But now the case had split beneath her feet. The second DNA profile, recovered from the zipper pull on Emily's backpack, matched someone connected not to Rourke, but to the original 2001 investigation team. That revelation was more than unsettling. It was destabilizing. McCall called the lab back. "Give me the name," she said. "It's not a full match," the tech explained, "but it is a familial match, a very close one, to retired Officer Daniel Harrow." McCall closed her eyes. Harrow wasn't just some old name from a dusty file. He was the officer who had been first on scene when the backpack was found. He was the one who ordered the evidence bagged. He was the one who reported no signs of tampering with the crime scene. And, importantly, Harrow was the one who insisted the case was a runaway, not an abduction. In 2001, his voice carried a lot of weight, but Harrow was dead. He passed away in 2019. So, who did the DNA belong to? His son? A nephew? A brother? Or, as the genealogist feared, a direct descendant? The tech's voice replayed in her mind. Someone who handled evidence. McCall stepped out her car, her breath forming a ghost white cloud in the cold afternoon air. She didn't walk up to Rourke's door. Not yet. Instead, she called the cold case unit. "I need everything you can find on Officer Daniel Harrow's surviving family," she said. "Addresses, occupations, connections to the department, and check if any of them worked in law enforcement." This was no longer just about a missing girl. It was about an investigation that might have been misdirected, intentionally or not. An hour later, sitting in a cafe parking lot with a plastic cup of coffee she forgot to drink, McCall received the file. Daniel Harrow had one living son, Christopher Harrow, 41 years old, currently working as a civilian evidence clerk in a neighboring county. A chill passed through her. Evidence clerk, access to materials, knowledge of procedures, understanding of what investigators look for and what they don't. But there was something else. Christopher Harrow had lived in Willow Bay until 2002, 1 block from Emily Harper. McCall dug deeper. A supplemental report from 2001 mentioned a male relative of Officer Harrow briefly assisting at the search site on the second day of Emily's disappearance. No name was listed. Could that have been Christopher? She clicked through the digital archive and found a grainy photo taken on day 2 of the search. A narrow street lined with volunteers and officers combing the area. In the background, nearly out of frame, stood a young man with his hands in his pockets, watching. Harrow's face. Harrow's bone structure. But younger, thinner. Christopher Harrow. It wasn't proof. Not even close. But it was enough to reorient the investigation. McCall made the decision instantly. She drove back to the precinct. Not to question Rourke. Not yet. She needed to understand whether the Harper case had been compromised from the beginning. As she entered the cold case room, she pulled out a fresh legal pad and wrote a single line across the top. Who benefited from this case going cold? The question sat in the air like a challenge. And for the first time since reopening the file, Detective McCall felt certain. She wasn't chasing just a suspect. She was chasing a truth someone tried very hard to bury. Detective McCall spent the next 2 days buried in files, reviewing every overlooked corner of the Harper case. What began as a renewed cold case investigation had shifted into something heavier, a question of whether the original investigators had unknowingly or deliberately missed the truth. The DNA link to Christopher Harrow was still only a partial match, but the statistical strength behind it was undeniable. Forensic genealogists rarely spoke with certainty, yet their wording in this case carried weight. A direct paternal relative of Rhett. Officer Daniel Harrow physically handled Emily Harper's belongings. In 2001, that list of potential relatives was short. Very short. McCall needed to know what Christopher Harrow was doing in the neighborhood on the day Emily disappeared, and why his name never appeared in the original case file. She drove to the small county building where Christopher worked. A quiet facility, a place where evidence came and went with almost no outside scrutiny. She watched him through the glass windows of the lobby, middle-aged, quiet, methodical, someone who could slip into a crowd and be forgotten within minutes. When she finally approached him, she kept her tone even. Christopher Harrow? I'm Detective McCall. I'm reopening the Emily Harper case. The name hit him like a physical blow. She saw his throat tighten, saw his eyes shift, not in confusion, not in fear, but in recognition. He agreed to speak with her voluntarily, though everything about his posture said he wanted the conversation to end before it began. Inside a small interview room, McCall laid out a single photo, a grainy picture from day 2 of the 2001 search. Christopher stared at his younger self, frozen on the page. I wasn't involved in that case, he said quietly. McCall pushed the second sheet forward, the DNA result summary. This says otherwise. For 10 long seconds, he didn't blink. Then the dam finally cracked. I was there, he whispered, but I didn't hurt her. McCall didn't speak. She let silence do the work. Christopher swallowed, eyes unfocused. My father, he told me to help with the search. I carried some of the items they found. The backpack, the notebooks. His voice thinned. He said it was fine. He said evidence handling wasn't formal yet, that I was just helping. McCall felt a sinking heaviness in her chest. Christopher wasn't confessing to violence. He was confessing to contamination. Evidence contamination so severe that it had warped 2 decades of investigative direction. But Emily, McCall said gently, did you see her that day? Christopher shook his head, and for the first time, she believed him. No, I swear I didn't. He wiped a hand across his face. The guilt wasn't the guilt of a predator. It was the guilt of a man who had carried a secret too long. A secret that for 24 years had redirected suspicion toward innocent people. McCall asked the question that mattered most. Why wasn't any of this in the original report? Christopher's voice broke. Because my father told him I wasn't there. He said it would complicate things. Complicate things. A quiet phrase that, in the context of 2001 policing, explained almost everything. Informal procedures, assumptions made, shortcuts taken, carelessness mistaken for certainty. The Harper investigation hadn't been corrupted. It had been compromised by sloppy handling, and a father protecting his son from departmental reprimand. But that left one final question. If you didn't harm Emily, then who did? Christopher looked up, fear flashing across his face. I don't know, but someone in that neighborhood did. Someone who knew when she walked home. Someone who knew that the maintenance tunnel was empty. The truth landed heavy. The real suspect had never surfaced. Not in the files, not in the interviews, not in the DNA. They were still out there, or had lived and died quietly with their secret intact. The cold case remained cold, not solved but clarified. Emily Harper's disappearance was not the result of a single villain hiding in the dark. It was a result of one predator, one contaminated piece of evidence, one flawed investigation, and 2 decades of silence. Detective McCall submitted her final report with a single recommendation: reopen all missing child cases from a 1998 to 2003 corridor. Untested evidence may now produce viable results. The department agreed. Emily Harper's case would remain open, officially, permanently. But for the first time, it was pointed in the right direction. At the end of her shift, McCall pinned Emily's photo back on the board, not as a reminder of failure, but as a reminder of responsibility. Cold cases don't die. They wait, and sometimes the only justice that remains is the truth finally coming into focus.